So hi, everybody, and thank you for joining us for our next episode in the SMA Physicians in Training Social Media and Medicine mini-series. Today, we're joined by Carmen Simmons, who is a fourth-year medical student at Meharry Medical College in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm going to turn it over first to Carmen so that she can introduce herself and say hello.
Okay. So, hi everybody, I'm Carmen. I am a fourth-year medical student at Meharry Medical College. I'm originally from Atlanta, Georgia, and I'm going into family medicine this year. So, yay.
Yay. So thank you so much, Carmen, for being willing to sit down and chat with us today. I'm going to share with the audience a little bit about how we connected. As communications chair, manage the social media accounts for physicians in training, and I get notifications from Twitter on specific accounts and tweets and stories that, they might think are of interest to us. And I had gotten a notification about a tweet you had sent out a couple of months ago regarding the cost of medical education. And I was reading the tweet and then I was reading the rest of your profile and I thought, wow, this would be a really great person to talk to learn more about how she uses Twitter, because that tweet in and of itself, it came to somebody else's attention. And that's, the sort of thing that we're trying to highlight here is how social media and medicine can go hand in hand and really enhance not only the medical education experience, but then our experience as practicing physicians once we complete our training.
Yes.
So I was wondering, Carmen, if you could start off by telling us a little bit more about what got you into using Twitter and some of your experiences so far with it.
It's weird because I never really thought about Twitter in this capacity. I'm on social media in general, like I'm on all the social media. So Twitter seemed like a natural thing to use as well. Then med Twitter, like maybe it always was, I don't know. I can't say that it just started, but it seemed like maybe in the last year or so, definitely throughout like the pandemic, it just really skyrocketed or just like became really, really popular. So I didn't have any real intentions, but yeah, just kind of like connecting with people. It's kind of cool because, as a medical student and even as a pre-med and stuff like that, like it's not hard to find people, but Twitter makes it so much easier. And so almost like you're the same platform. Like, yeah, they're attending or they're like the director or something like that, but you're interacting with them in a very like friendly, common, not it's not that it's not professional, but it's not kind of the whole gambit of, I would go approach a mentor and go ask them. It's just kind of like a community. So
and maybe it's a little more organic than
I think that's
structure
exactly
to it,
Yeah, it's just like that's exactly how I would describe it. It's organic. So yeah.
Great. So what do you think that you've been able to enjoy the most about your experience joining the whole med Twitter community and what you've got out of it so far, especially as you mentioned the last year, it's really grown a lot?
Yeah, I would say this is so corny, but I've met a lot of people and just really connected with a lot of people. There's just another group of med students that I've just really talked to a lot, and they've become my friends. I've gotten mentors. I'm able to, like, people have reached out for me to mentor them, which I'm like, wow, are you sure? I don't know. But and just kind of and then even like the tweet about medical education and like help start conversations about like, hey, this is a real thing that's out here. I owe a ungodly amount of money, and just kind of like saying like, hey, this is the reality of it. And then there's also like some other things like the med bikini thing, and just kind of really starting conversations but also being a part of the discussion. So I think a lot of times we are a part of the discussion, but in a much smaller voice for med students. But Twitter kind of gives you a platform where you have an equal amount of say-so and just kind of a equal amount of reception too. So
yeah. And for our listeners who might not know the whole med bikini fiasco, I'll give a little summary. There was an article that came out in a prominent vascular surgery journal. It was around a year ago, I'd say. It was one of the many things that happened in 2020.
Oh my God.
Where they had done a study where they were evaluating social media and how that played into the vascular surgery residency application process and how they were rating applicants. And there was a really heavy bias against females who would either, you know, have pictures at the beach in bikinis, or if they were casually drinking a glass of wine, and they were not showing that same level toward the male applicants of scrutiny. And there was a lot of backlash. They actually ended up retracting the article over the attention it got, because it needed attention, because it brought up a really important point about how do we portray ourselves, and then how is that, you know, perceived by others in really negative ways. In this case, why are we, you know, discriminating against certain applicants because they're showing that they actually have a life and they're doing something that they're, especially in this case, female applicants, when the male applicants are doing the exact same thing. It's just completely bonkers.
It was crazy. It was. And yeah, that was an excellent summary. It was just, that was crazy. And I think I literally have no idea why. I really just say stuff and people tend to like it, or I guess have very similar opinions. And so kind of with the med bikini too, that kind of went quote unquote like viral. And I was just like, hey, like because I have a med bikini, or not med bikini, but like a bikini beach picture up on my profile that I've had for like years now. Honestly, it's like my pin tweet. And I was like, it was me and all my friends who are also in med school. And I was like, hey, like we're celebrating step 1 and like passing it and like finishing it or whatever. And it's a picture of all of us on the beach in bathing suits. And I was like, oh, well. And then of course I'm matching this year and I'm going into the match. So everything that I do, or for me, I'm like always like super scrutinizing and like, okay, is this okay? Is this going to be professional? Is this going to hurt my chances of matching? So when that article came out, I was like, geez, like even when you try to be professional or you think you're like checking all the boxes, somebody still is like, you know, has something to say. You're just like, God, this is too much. So,
yeah. So we've talked a little bit about some of the topics that you like to jump in on and share an opinion for on Twitter. Are there any in particular that maybe we haven't talked about yet that you feel like you really want to talk about now and share your experience, kind of topic start to finish?
Yeah, I just tweet. Like there's really not a lot of thought behind it. I wish people really knew that. Like I really am. I tweet about a lot of things, mainly cooking. But I would say recently even, so family medicine obstetrics is a field that I'm really, really, really passionate about. Like I cannot believe that there's a field out there like that, because it's absolutely perfect to me. And why no one would want to go into that field is beyond my comprehension, because it's the absolute best thing in the world. So, but I was able to kind of tweet about family medicine obstetrics and about maternal mortality and infant mortality, and how family medicine obstetrics plays a very critical role, and just really interested in how this is going to play out in the future and how we can really find some real solutions and using family med obstetrics, and especially using family med obstetrics with Black doctors, and just kind of that. So that's something I'm really passionate about. And then, like I said, also cooking, like, so cost of med education, I guess med bikini, and family med obstetrics, and a dash of what I'm eating today.
Very cool. What are you eating today or this weekend?
When I got on with you earlier, I actually need to go grocery shopping really, really bad. So for breakfast this morning, I'm eating chips and salsa, which I eat an insane amount of chips and salsa. So it's actually not even that weird for me. Eating chips and salsa at 9 a.m. in the morning.
And that is the med student diet. You know, we try our best to eat healthy and be healthy and teach our patients to do the same. But at the end of the day, you know, when you're on a budget and you've got a limited amount of time, you do what you can. And so I think we can relate to that too with our patients.
I am eating, well, I try to tell myself that salsa is healthy. I'm like, oh, it's the tomatoes and it's, you know, some vegetables in there, but really I just love chips and salsa and it's easy. So that's what I'm eating today.
Yeah, that's funny. So I'm going to see if we could maybe talk a little bit more about that cost of medical education and, you know, not only how, you know, how I came about even meeting you virtually through the tweet, but also just your experience with the cost of medical education in general and some of your thoughts on where you think it should go in the future.
Okay, so I'm very much in the camp that like education should be, if not free, next to free. Like, oh my gosh, I try to forget the number because I don't want to think about it too much, but I owe just about $450,000 in the cost of education, and I did not pay anything for undergrad. So that's all postgraduate training. That's my medical school, and I did a post-bac for a year. So my post-bac was like around 60,000, and then so my med school has been around 400,000, which roughly translates about 100 a year. And like that's crazy. Like, I mean, it's you can't even really imagine it in hard terms, because if you do, you'll want to quit. And well, you can't quit because now you owe $450,000 in loans. But I mean, that's just, it shouldn't be that way in any respect. And the price of medical education has skyrocketed. It is not what, you know, the previous generations were paying at all. And I think that sometimes they try to put it out there like, oh, well, I paid for medical school. And I'm like, well, yeah, it was still expensive, but like, it wasn't $450,000 expensive. It was like, oh, I owe 100 or I owe 50,000 in loans, which is still, I feel like, too much. But at the same time, that is a more conceivable amount to pay back. So I'm very much in the camp that, hey, we need to really be doing things that are making it way more accessible. And I know I get this all the time too, which is not the point. That's not, will I be able to pay back my loans? Yes. But does it put me in a very different position? And then like, let's talk about too, like a lot of people who go to medical school, a lot of people come from families who are able to really support them and help them with their medical tuition and et cetera. And it's not even that I come from like this low socioeconomic status or anything. Like I feel like I come from a very normal background. I recently found out that my background is not the same as a lot of my classmates, which I had no idea until we were talking about the loan stuff. And they were like, oh, I don't have loans. And I was like, how?
Yeah.
I never thought about, you know, parents or anything being able to pay for people's medical school or postgraduate. It literally never crossed my mind. And it's not that I disagree with parents doing that. It's something that was never a possibility for me. And so or any of the people I knew growing up or something like that. So I just never thought about it. And so I'm like, okay, so this is clearly a cycle, like for those who come from, you know, lower socioeconomic statuses. And first of all, they get to medical school, like, honestly, like this is a whole nother topic, but like statistically, I'm not, you know, supposed to be here and like make it this far and etc. Like it's a real miracle that I'm here. And so at first I had to get to medical school, and then now I have to pay for it. And so like my colleagues who are starting off with maybe, you know, $20,000 in loans versus me starting off with $450,000 in loans, you can see how that continues throughout our life. So like I'm playing catch up. Right. And you know, so most of those people too are able to help with like, you know, buying a house or putting down a down payment. And it's a generational wealth. And once again, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that clearly puts certain students in a very, very different situation for their entire careerhood. And then you know, then people try to choose like specialties, or they feel pressure to choose specialties. And I don't blame anybody. Or twofold, right? Because you can join the military, so to help with the cost of education, or you can do service loans, which I'm not going to speak about service loans because one, I don't know a lot about them, but what I do know about them is that sometimes it's tricky.
Right. And I'm actually a military scholarship student. So I'm in the Army Health Profession Scholarship Program. And, you know, I found myself in a somewhat similar position where I looked at the cost of going to my medical school, and I looked at where I wanted my career to go. And I was at least fortunate enough to be in a position where I wanted to start my career by serving my country and having my career in medicine be rooted in public service, while also keeping in mind, it wasn't necessarily just the loan amount, but also how do I look at financial stability once I get to residency, once I get to being a staff attending, what will my life look like in terms of making all these other adult purchases, adult decisions down the line in my 30s. You know, how am I going to be able to balance all that while also thinking about the cost of of loans and accruing that interest that will come with it. And, you know, I'm very fortunate to also be able to do this scholarship, and I've been chosen for it because I know that's not something that's even an option to everybody. And you know, for me, I think about how could we potentially try to start to solve this problem by finding and creating more scholarships like mine, where not necessarily even in the military, but where you're, instead of giving back in loans and paying back in loans, you're paying back in time of service. So for me, I will owe, after my residency, 4 years on active duty to pay back for the 4 years of medical school. If I ended up doing a longer residency, then it's the longer of the two. So it might be 5 or 6 years, but it ends up panning out where I know somebody who went through this process, and the way he looks at it, which I think is interesting, and it might shift with some of the changes in how doctors are being paid in the military. Are you getting that money up front, or are you getting that money later? And I was thinking, okay, would I rather have some more flexibility in my life a little bit earlier to be able to have that financial stability? And I think it is also very interesting. I did not expect that getting to med school myself, you know, the different levels of support that people have been able to provide. And, you know, I'm lucky for the sort of support I've been able to have from my family coming up to med school. But it's definitely a much wider range of people than I expected, you know, not to mention people who, you know, are taking out full loans. And it's a really wide range of people who have no loans and people who have all the loans. And
I think they've done that, right? Like apparently it's like bimodal, basically. So basically you have a very low amount of loans, or you have my end of the spectrum. And that really speaks to the kind of what type of people are going into medical school. And it's not a secret, you know, a lot of people's parents and their grandparents are doctors, and you know, like, oh, I'm like the 7th doctor in my family, which is cool, and that should be like, it's a good thing. But it's just also kind of like, how are we still, you know, perpetrating the status quo on that? And how are we getting students whose parents aren't doctors and, you know, don't have like that? And I think people will try to make it seem like a bad thing. It's not that it's a bad thing. It's just, it's very different. We're starting off on very, very different, you know, goalposts right now, and just being cognizant of that, and just kind of, and this is kind of something too, but I matched this year, and I moved to residency, and then somebody pointed out that we're not going to get our residency checks before we need to put down like a deposit for our apartments and etc. And it's not that I didn't think about it, because it's things I think about, but like, I'm like, oh my gosh, how am I going to make sure that I have enough money to, one, live, and then also make sure I have enough money for whatever future, because I don't know where I'm going. And like, I mean, I hope I know where I'm going, and, you know, I have a top choice and my top 3, but at the same time, I don't have an apartment or a house or any of those places. So it's just kind of like, what do I do? And then it's just different. You think a lot more in advance. And my family is very supportive of me. Like I have a lot of financial support, a lot of emotional support. Like it's not that, but
right. Same here with me. Like
they're
very
not
very thankful when
for my education.
Very thankful when I can get a little bit of extra help with my car.
My glare is like exactly like, and I this is all kind of coming out very recently in regards to actually the Bloomberg scholarship. That's kind of how this all really started for me, is when I found out. So the Bloomberg scholarship, just as like a quick recap, Bloomberg philanthropies, oh gosh, I can't say that word. Anyways, like they gave a scholarship up to $100,000 for Black medical students at the HBCU medical schools. And one of them is which I attend, Meharry. And basically, the stipulation is you need to be African American in medical school. So that was really awesome. And there's like some other stipulations. But the point is that they saw this disparity and like, hey, a lot of our Black doctors need money, period. Because I mean, just systemic racism and, et cetera. Like it, but and given that I go to HBCU, so typically most people's generational wealth stops at like 3 generations because we're Black. So just history-wise, right? Right. But still, some of their parents are paying for their medical school, and I had no idea because, and this is ignorant of me, and I'll admit that. But I figure like, hey, you're Black, I'm Black, we're in some type of similar social economic status, and we're all taking out $1 billion in loans, and that just wasn't true. And I just had no idea. Like if I went to another school that, like I said, if you're the 7th generation of doctors, I can conceptualize that a little bit more. Mm-hmm. But or just kind of understand how history played out and how generational wealth has incurred over so much that makes sense to me. But to know that a lot of the people that I know who are kind of like, I'm going to say normal, but I thought were in very similar situations that I was, because I never thought about it, never cared to think about it until we found out like, oh, you have to, the other thing about the scholarship is that you have to qualify for loans. So you have to have at least $100,000 in loans, or not at least, but like it only goes to loans. And so some people weren't getting the scholarship. And I was like, well, why aren't some people getting the scholarship? They're Black, they're a medical student. And the thing is they didn't have loans. So I was like, wow. And they weren't on like the military scholarship or like something like that. Their families were helping them, or however they figured out how to pay for it. I was like, oh, wow, okay.
Yeah. And I actually think what Mayor Michael Bloomberg has been doing is great. And I think it's really important to see people take their philanthropy and really start to try to address this issue, especially by providing that support to HBCUs and the medical students, that they can get some help to try to move the goalpost to meet everybody else. And actually, interestingly enough, I am also a past benefactor of Michael Bloomberg's philanthropy. I was a Bloomberg scholar for my undergraduate at Johns Hopkins. So I had a partial merit scholarship through his program there. And he's been really ramping up his dedication to supporting medical students. And now, not just undergraduates at Johns Hopkins. And I think that's really important to see more awareness and attention be brought to that issue, because he's somebody who has the means and the platform to do it. So I actually met Mayor Bloomberg a couple of years ago. Yeah, so it was a very cool meeting.
Love to meet him.
So Carmen is at Where in My World, which by the way, I think is hilarious. Carmen Sandiego, Where in My World. I think that's great. And so currently Carmen has 2,897 followers.
That's crazy.
So that's pretty exciting. And Physicians in Training is one of them, but there's many, many, many more. And I'm also...
It's not like, never mind. I follow back.
As I think would be a good segue into our last question and our last discussion topic for this first part of our podcast with you, Carmen, to talk a little bit more about your choice to go into family medicine obstetrics. And, we had mentioned before about how that might play a role in how people decide their specialties, how they're balancing the cost of education. I've also seen you've done a lot of, advocacy and awareness to the topic on social media, because it's something you're so passionate about. So tell me a little bit more about where you see yourself going in 1 year, 5 year, 10 years out after residency.
Okay, so I can tell you, and oh my gosh, like a month, 2 months, I'll find out where I'm going to residency. So that's a really big deal. It's so nerve-wracking. It really is. It's so nerve-wracking. And then the other thing, just like family medicine, obstetrics, long story short, before coming to medical school, I'm a doula. So I help women during childbirth. And I also worked in UNC's internal medicine office as a care assistant, which is really like a patient advocate, patient navigator type role. And so I knew I really liked internal medicine. I knew I really liked OB. And I was like, oh my God, which one am I going to have to give up basically when I when I get to medical school or whatever. But I was like, okay, well, that's not till to like third, fourth year, I can figure it out. And first year, there was this sign and it said something about like family medicine obstetrics. And honestly, I didn't know a lot about family medicine before going into medical school. So I was like, that sounds weird, but like, whatever, what could it hurt for me to go? And then, long story short, now here I am, and I'm super radical about it. And it was Dr. Rodney. He's like a firecracker in this field, and he was just so passionate and just kind of showed me that I didn't have to give up anything. And that was, I mean, I'm still so grateful. Like, I really am. I cannot understate how grateful I am for that just random, or, you know, I don't believe in coincidences. I know that's like kind of like hippie, but I really don't. I think everything happens for a reason. I think everything is meant for you, and things are really put together for a greater purpose. And yeah, so now I'm like really passionate about family medicine obstetrics. I think you mentioned specialty choice. And once again, like my loan money is just such an abstract concept to me, because you can't, I've never seen that amount of money in real life ever. So like, I can't even imagine what that type of money is. So I'm not advocating for this. You should definitely know. But so it didn't have a real factor into what I wanted to do, because at this point I was like, you know, I'm going to be a doctor. I'll be able to pay it off eventually, whatever, etc. Also thought everybody was in the same boat as I was. So that's also something I didn't think that was really factoring into a lot of people's decisions, because everybody wanted to be different things. So, and I all thought everybody had the same amount of loans that I did until recently. So, but of course there's like things that I think about, like, oh, okay, hey, if you go into a primary care specialty, you can have your loans forgiven, stuff like that. And I was like, okay, that, it seemed to me like a bonus versus something that attracted me to doing primary care. I'm fortunate in that aspect, once again, because I was just like, oh, whatever, I'll figure it out later. I'll figure it out down the road. I'll be okay. But I do know for a lot of people that's like, they're like, hey, if I go into this field, I can get my loans forgiven. Or also, hey, if I go into this field, I'll have a substantial amount of money to be able to pay back my loans and still live a comfortable lifestyle that I want, that I imagine myself living. So that's something that, I mean, that's heard a lot. Like, that's not something, it's not even like whispered. That is a thing for real. And I don't even know if this is like a residency violation or not. I have absolutely no idea. But I remember one of the program directors on my interviews asked me how much did I owe in loans. And I actually, that's what actually inspired the tweet, because I was like, I don't know. Like, I didn't know. Like, I mean, I knew roughly, but I just didn't know the exact number. And so when he asked me that, and I was like, oh, I don't know, like 500, I don't know. I have no idea. And so I went back that night and calculated my student loan debt. And then that's what actually inspired the tweet. So whatever day that was. Like,
wow, that is quite a personal question for them to have asked. I'm pretty surprised they did that. It's, you know, you hear a lot about, you know, program directors potentially asking about, oh, are you married? Oh, when are you having kids? Or having potential employers ask that, especially of female applicants. But to ask about your finances, I think it's one thing what we're doing to normalize the discussion of finances, student loans, but it's another thing to ask it when you're trying to get a job, you know?
Right. And it was weird, because I was like, this sounds like it's not a violation, but also like it may be a violation. I was like, I have no idea where this is on the spectrum of things. So, and it's not that I even felt upset that he asked. I was definitely like kind of like, oh, okay, that's not something I've ever been asked by anybody. But it's really funny. Like, literally anybody. I remember calculating the debt, and I was telling my mom and my grandmother cried because she had no idea. She cried. Anyway, so yeah. And I think his goal was, he was actually asking, like, and this is a horrible way, I think, but he was like, oh, so you really are committed to primary care because you have this substantial amount of debt and you're still going into family medicine. Like, oh, you must really want to do this. So I was like, yeah. I think I made that pretty clear at this point. But
it's a weird way to go about trying to confirm your passion for primary care. I think there's a lot of other ways to ask that question and get that information, but
I don't know. I mean,
got it.
I'm sure there's some type of method to his madness, and just it also could just be like in general, just like seeing where like I have no idea. This is what his intentions were, honestly, like other than what he said, but maybe it's just kind of to get a gauge on like what the applicant pool looks like these days and what the cost of medical education looks like and who's going into these fields and et cetera. So maybe I don't know. What I'm saying is he asked me and I was like, that's actually a good question. I don't know. I should probably follow up on that because at least the exact dollar amount. That's what I was saying. Right. But yeah, so he asked that. And so there's a lot of people who are pushed out of primary care. There's a lot of people who are pushed into primary care. And I just want to be very clear about this. I think having scholarships is amazing. It really is. It's amazing. But I think it's a Band-Aid, I think it's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound. Right. Like it's just not sustainable. It just really isn't. I think that people are very well-meaning. I'm very thankful for the scholarships that I've been able to receive. I've been very thankful for the opportunities that are out there. But at the end of the day, kind of we're doing things on the back end when we can do things on the front end. And you can still encourage people to go into primary care. Like, I think people try to make it seem like, oh, well, no one's going to go to primary care. There's not an incentive. And I don't think that's true. And then also and then, the other side was like, oh, everybody's going to specialize because they need to pay. And so it's just kind of like, look, you're not going to be able to really persuade people to do something or not do something if you don't want to. Like what we can do as far as primary care, that's my passion, clearly. We can, one, advocate, like me, I had no idea about family medicine before I got to medical school. And then a lot of medical schools don't even have family medicine. So there's a potential I could have gone to another medical school and still had no idea. Do I think I'll still be working in the communities that I'm working with? Yes, but it probably wouldn't be in the same capacity and may not be in the same type of impact that I will have in family medicine obstetrics. I truly believe that. So you can, one, advocate, mentor, et cetera, blah, 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 have these different pathways, but trying to push people in to do service loan forgiveness or to do something else in that capacity, or I just don't think it's the right way. And like I said, I think it's a Band-Aid on a gunshot wound because it's gotten ridiculous. And this all education, undergrad has gotten ridiculous. Professional school is ridiculous. It's just not sustainable. It's just not. And especially for students like me who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, that it's just not possible.
Right.
So.
Of course. Not to mention the cost of getting from undergrad to med school or from med school to residency. It's
ridiculous. It really is. And so for me, I've never had a job really, a real one. So residency will be my first job, and I'll be making more in residency than a lot of people that I know. And I'm and everybody's kind of this is a whole different rant, but I'm oh, we're so broke and we're broke residents and stuff like that. And I'm just I know people who have children on salaries much lower than this. Right. Not advocating that residents to get paid lower, because I think they did the whole thing where you get paid under minimum wage when you do it by hours, which is the whole nother, once again, there's a lot of rants when it comes to education and the price of it. But what I'm saying is $60,000 or, $50,000, that's a lot of money. This really good salary from a lot of places that I'm from and a lot of people that I know. That's a really good salary. And to other people, that's oh my God, I cannot believe I'm so poor. And I'm oh God, you have no idea what poor is, because this is good. This right. is really good. And I think also too, for me, knowing that I'll make, at least $150,000 when I become a doctor, to me, that's wow, I made it, and et cetera. Versus, I know a lot of people are oh my gosh, I can't believe family medicine doesn't get paid any money. And I'm just that's a lot of money. And so it's just, the perspective is really different. It really is. So.
Well, this was a great conversation for our first podcast with Carmen Simmons, who's at Where in My World on Twitter. And we're going to be coming back for a second episode with Carmen. That'll be coming soon, where we're going to talk a little bit more about promoting diversity in medical education and really the effective ways to take care of underserved communities in medicine. Thank you so much, Carmen, for joining us. And I'm looking forward to our next podcast.
Yes. Bye.